Hello and welcome back to the Eau Rouge podcast for the season opener. And Chris, what a blinder we got for our first season opening podcast. The year we decide to start doing this podcast, we actually get a really, really good opening race of the season, which works out really nicely. It was such a good race, and we're going to talk as much about it as we possibly can. Before we get into the race itself, qualifying actually set up a Verstappen and Hamilton battle, which qualifying itself was actually really interesting, was really fun to watch and really exciting as qualifying sessions go. And it set up this Hamilton-Verstappen battle, and we were not disappointed. Long may this continue throughout the season. There was lots of overtakes in the race. There was a lot of brilliant defensive work. There was some really interesting strategical calls, and there was even a couple of crashes, and we'll definitely get onto that later on. But we got the battle, more or less, that we have been waiting for such a long time, with Hamilton versus Verstappen. And I think, first of all, we have to just say what a drive from Hamilton to get that win.
I text you straight after the race saying, I defy you to tell me that Hamilton is not the greatest driver of all time. It was one of the masterful defensive displays from a man you don't normally associate with needing defensive displays. Every single DRS zone, I was sat there thinking he's going to get past him, he's going to get past him, he's going to get past him. And every time Hamilton covered him off. I don't know whether that differential problem that Verstappen was talking about played a role in it, but whatever it was, the faster Red Bull on the fresher, softer tyres just couldn't get past him. And I think that you can keep a driver like Verstappen, who's chomping at the bit to get past you behind you, for those last few laps, questionable overtaking decision to give the place back aside, really speaks volumes to the quality of the battle we might get to have this year.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about the strategy as well in a second, but let's move on to talking about that crucial pass where he did actually pass Hamilton and then ended up giving the place back. He went around the outside into turn 4, but went wide across the white line and was told to give the place back. Now, I was looking back at it and I was sort of thinking, well, by the time he had gone off the track, he was pretty much past Hamilton, but obviously going off the track still gave him that advantage to be able to push past him, because if he had to have slowed down a little bit more in order to stay within the track limits, Hamilton probably would have got a better run out of the corner and overtaken him back anyway. But the call came in from the Red Bull team to say that he needed to give the place back, and that was determined by the stewards, so they've said. And Verstappen was arguing that actually he could have carried on and just taken the 5-second penalty, which they were assuming he would have gotten, and he could have pulled out that 5-second gap. Do we think that the team should have just let him do that?
I think you're opening the door to a can of worms. I understand Verstappen's point, he probably could have done. But I think a little bit like that time in 1999 when they allowed Schumacher to take a stop-and-go penalty after he'd finished the race. You're opening the door to abuse, because if the penalty's not a penalty, what's the point in having it? If every driver who can win a race can just break the rules and then exploit their tyre advantage to get 7 or 8 seconds down the road before the second penalty can affect them, you're risking a lot later in the season. Because if there's one thing we know about Formula One, it's that someone will try that, given half a chance further down the line. So I understand Verstappen's point of view, but I think they'd have lumped him with a 10-second penalty or a disqualification or something for trying it in the end, because it is blatantly cheating, really, isn't it?
So actually, Red Bull did the sportsmanlike thing in order to get Verstappen to let him through. But I think that we can probably both agree that he let him past in the wrong part of the track. He could have either done it on the sort of the final straight just before the final turn, so he would have actually got onto the start and finish straight with DRS. If he didn't get past him then, could have had another bite at the cherry into the second DRS zone, or he could have let him pass on the start finish straight, just let him edge in front, because you don't have to let him go all the way through. I don't think it actually says anywhere in the regulations where you have to let them go the full car length past. As long as you let them go in front, then you have the chance to get back in front after that. And he could have, if he again had let him pass on the start finish straight, couldn't then take use of that advantage into the first corner. He could have had another try for the second DRS zone. So he really should have maybe thought more carefully about where he let Hamilton through.
Waited a second and let him through. Yeah, no, I think that's probably Verstappen's only weakness, as far as I can see, is that his racecraft is not as strong as Hamilton's. Hamilton is a consummate racer. His strategy calls are always brilliant. But Verstappen is probably the fastest guy on track. He is the hungriest guy on track because Hamilton really has nothing to prove, but Verstappen has absolutely everything to prove. And he's so intent on displaying his supremacy and winning that title. I think it can lead to stupid mistakes. I don't think Verstappen's racecraft is as good as, say, his teammates. And we saw from Perez today, Perez's racecraft, after that disastrous qualifying and even more disastrous parade lap, is an example of what Verstappen needs to emulate. And Verstappen talked a lot before the season about learning from his teammate. It's great that Perez can come here. If that wasn't just lip service, this is the time to learn that lesson, because that's the missing piece of the puzzle that will help give him his first title that he so badly wants.
And that kind of thing comes with experience, doesn't it? And not just experience in racing, but experience in racing against the best and having on-track battles, which we as fans have been starved of it. And obviously now it's kind of come to fruition that really Verstappen's been starved of it as well, because if he had had the opportunity to have more on-track battles with the likes of Lewis Hamilton, the best driver on the grid, then actually he could have been in a better position to take that place. There were times where I was watching it, and when he was edging closer and closer, not close enough to actually pass, maybe not even in the DRS zone, but as he was edging closer, he was just nipping out of the slipstream towards the end, just having like a little peek. And I assume he was doing that to maybe put Lewis under a little bit of pressure, to just kind of make him always checking in his mirrors and things like that. But to me, that felt impatient. It felt like he was pushing too much. And at times, when it comes to just trying to get the right time to pass the person in front of you, you need to be patient. You need to bide your time a little bit. And it seemed that he has that level of impatience, which is what he needs in order to actually be a proper challenger for the World Championship. But knowing when to pass is obviously a skill he's got to learn.
I think that was Hamilton's problem in his first season. It was that impatience cost him the title in 2007. So when he gradually gained it over the years, he's become unstoppable. And if Verstappen can understand that patience, understand waiting for the right moment and not just trying to destroy everyone in your way, then he will be really, really successful.
And kind of looking at the race as a whole, the pendulum was swinging constantly throughout. It was really difficult to tell who was going to be in the lead come, towards the end of the race. And Red Bull had the advantage. Verstappen, I thought, one thing that, I thought he drove really well throughout the race, other than the moments that we were talking about where he should have been more calm when passing Hamilton. I thought he did a really good job to keep his head when at the beginning of the race, we had safety cars, we had virtual safety cars. It was really stop-start for the first couple of laps. And he crucially held onto that lead over Hamilton at the beginning, which was really important. And then it got to the pit stops. And for some reason, Red Bull decided to just leave Verstappen out for, I think it was an extra 3 or 4, maybe even 5 laps before pitting him. And Hamilton got the true undercut on him, really, really, gained a huge advantage through that. Should Red Bull have pitted him? Should have Red Bull have pitted Verstappen earlier?
I think what Red Bull were trying to do was negate the undercut by keeping Verstappen out so long. When he got fresh tyres, Hamilton would be forced to re-pit. But it just didn't work. And I think in hindsight, if they had, as you say, brought him in when they saw Hamilton trying the undercut, they probably would have won the race because they had the better car, they had the faster car. Their pit stops, unlike Mercedes, were looking very fresh and effective. And I think keeping him out ended up as close as he got. It cost him time overall because when it came down to it, he never got near enough to Hamilton apart from the last couple of laps to really trouble him for the lead. Hamilton would pull in for new tyres every time Verstappen got too close for comfort, and then right at the end managed to hold him off.
And I think it's important to note as well, despite the late pit stop for Verstappen, Hamilton, regardless, still had to go 27 laps on those hard tyres. And I think I heard right when Hamilton pitted. Ted Kravitz was talking on Sky Sports, and he was saying, "There's no way Hamilton can eke this out. It's going to be an almighty stint for him to be able to get that to the end of the race." And he did it. And not only did he do it, he did it defending against the next best driver in the field. This man deserves to be 8 times world champion, doesn't he?
Yes, no, I think like we saw in Turkey last year, whenever Hamilton is truly called upon to show his class, he always seems to deliver. Gone is the driver of old who'd sometimes struggle over pressure and be forced into stupid mistakes. Apart from one slight slither right in the heat of battle, I don't think Hamilton put a wheel wrong today. And that showed in 25 points for the win. And it's what you need to do if you want the title. And I will be fascinated to see if, come the end of the season, this is the point already where Verstappen dropped the points he needed.
Well, that's it. And Martin Brundle said at the end of the race today that this was Red Bull's race to lose, and they did. And I think that in the context now, the way we're looking at this championship, and it's only been one race, we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but if it's shaping up to be that kind of battle, then those fine margins are going to be incredibly important for Verstappen come the end of the season.
Yes, I think Verstappen will be kicking himself anyway. He looked miserable on the podium. He looked miserable in the interview afterwards. But he should, by every conceivable standard, have won today. And somehow he comes away second best yet again.
Before we move on to talking about some of the other key moments of that race and talking about some of the other drivers, I do just want to ask you, because it is the first race of the season. It's the longest season in F1. We've got another 22 races to go. Can F1, or can Hamilton and Verstappen, can Mercedes and Red Bull, can we have a sustained title fight to the end of the year, do you think?
Yes. Will we? I don't know. In terms of the drivers, Hamilton wants the 8th, Verstappen wants his first. I think that they will keep their side of the fight up for as long as possible. But in terms of team development, we'll see when the upgrades come in, will the pendulum swing decisively one way or the other? It's not entirely clear, but I think it's going to come down ultimately to who can have the best package provided by their team rather than who is the best driver.
So let's talk about some of the other key moments of the race. We've got there's so much to talk about because actually the midfield battle was pretty good. I do want to touch on the teammates of both of those drivers we've been talking about. If the number 2 drivers, if you like, to Hamilton and Verstappen, which is Bottas and Perez. Bottas looked very lethargic. He's never looked comfortable in this car, to be fair, at Bahrain. So maybe a 3rd place is actually quite a good achievement. But despite the fastest lap at the end, he was never involved in that battle for the win, even though he's driving the same car as Lewis Hamilton, and he nearly lost that podium even with the dodgy pit stop that he had as well. Is this a sign of things to come for Bottas this season?
Bottas is one of those perennial nearly men. He was so good at Williams, and for one reason or another, those little things he needs to come together for him at Mercedes just haven't happened. And I do feel bad for him because I think it really eats him inside that it's been so difficult for him to try and compete. I think he's unfortunate that he's gone to partner the greatest driver of all time. And it's very clear now that Verstappen will inherit Hamilton's mantle as reigning generational talent as soon as humanly possible. If not this year, then probably next, let's be honest. Bottas just... I feel quite harsh, sort of saying Bottas doesn't have what he needs to have to win the title. But I think we've seen it now. Everyone always says, you know, you can only compare yourself to your teammate, but your teammate's won 6 of the last 7 titles on the bounce, and you're struggling to pick up race wins here and there.
And Bottas hasn't been, you know, strong competition for Hamilton over the last 3 years when he's been winning those titles either. And I think that's a worrying sign. I don't think Bottas will appreciate me saying this, not that he listens yet, but I really felt quite sorry for him when watching Drive to Survive. I really like him as a person, as a driver. I like the way he drives. I like his determination, his calmness as well, like that Finnish kind of, you know, personality that you and I especially have been drawn to in previous generations of drivers. But it's true, he hasn't got what it takes, has he? And if you've got Verstappen, who is a lot younger than him, in a car that's now finally seeming like it can challenge, it's not looking good for him, is it?
No, it's not. I third this year. I think I had him second. You had him third in your predictions. And if today, it's a long season, but if today had things to go by, I think you've probably nailed that one.
Well, that exactly. I think that Verstappen has got that bit between his teeth that Bottas just doesn't seem to have at the moment. But let's talk about Verstappen's teammate, Checo Perez, who had a dreadful weekend. Qualifying did not go well for him. And then on the formation lap, the car decided just to turn off, and he was sort of left stranded, had to go into the pit lane. And then he got driver of the day because of how brilliantly he recovered.
He did. We know that he can recover from last to do very well at Bahrain. That in itself is not a surprise. But yes, I mean, I felt terrible for him yesterday when it didn't work out in Q2, and you could hear him yelling into the radio. You could tell he was frustrated. And then his engine cut out on the parade lap, and I thought, lucky this has happened to him, so he doesn't have to suffer an ignominious race. And then he went and proved me wrong by having the best race. I think as much as Hamilton deserves his plaudits for that sterling defence at the end, that was sort of the kind of drive that Perez was giving everyone the entire race, just again and again and again and again and again, overtaking and overtaking, pitting, losing the positions, fighting his way back up, pitting, losing the positions, fighting his way back up. It was the reason he was signed by Red Bull today. You could see it. And I think that as upset as Red Bull will be by failing to win the race, they will take heart from the brilliant performance of Perez.
Exactly. And I don't think we would have expected Albon or even Gasly to have put in a performance necessarily like Perez did. And I think Bottas can consider himself quite lucky that Perez was not didn't actually end up starting from his 11th position, because I think he would have been under a lot of pressure and Perez could have potentially got that third place. So it's looking really good for Checo in that second Red Bull seat. And all we want to see is him actually fighting up there with the Mercedes as well, and not having to produce one of those performances from the back of the grid again. We want to see him fighting for podiums and race wins.
Yes, yeah, we do. And I think we will. I think today is just evidence that is exactly what's going to happen. And I would be surprised if, given everything we've seen this weekend, Perez doesn't take a race win this term.
So let's talk about the midfield then. We won't talk about everything and everyone, but we will just touch on a few points. McLaren looked good. Lando Norris especially had a really good race. 4th place is really, really strong. And I think that it bodes well for McLaren in the future for going forward. I do think it's important, though, to think in testing, we were talking a lot about how the packs seem to have kind of condensed a little bit, that everyone seemed a little bit closer to each other. But actually, I think this race tells us that that's not the case, because Norris still finished something like 47 seconds behind Bottas. That midfield group still finished a long way behind. So actually, I think what we've got now is, rather than Mercedes far, far out front, then Red Bull, and then the best of the rest, we've now got Mercedes and Red Bull far, far out front, and then the rest of the midfield, and then Haas way at the back. So even though this is really, really positive for McLaren, and they're definitely going to be on for some podiums this year, no doubt, I'm not convinced that we've actually got a closer field this year.
No, I think it's a little. There's some competition at the front. The midfield is tighter. That's not the same as having a close field. The back markers were still pretty dreadful. I was cheering for Russell as he got up to 10th at one point, but he didn't have the legs to keep going. The less said about Haas, the better. I was concerned for them at the start of the season. I'm even more concerned for them after this weekend. I'm concerned for the sport because I think that Mazepin will buy the team. And as we saw from today, I don't think Mazepin is remotely ready for Formula One. But more on that later. In regards to the rest of the team, yes, we've seen Aston Martin fall back, which has offset the improvement from Ferrari, which has offset the gains from McLaren. The Alphas maybe slightly more competitive, but again, yeah, you're not going to see a Raikkonen podium. Giovinazzi isn't going to be taking the checkered flag anytime soon. It's a false sense of closeness, I think, based on how exciting the race was.
Which means I think that the rule changes for next year are still absolutely necessary. But that doesn't mean, I hope that people listening don't think that actually means that we're detracting from the fact that there were still some fantastic battles in the midfield. We saw plenty of overtakes from McLaren, Ferrari, Aston Martin. Well, that's Aston Martin, Stroll mostly, and Alpine as well, with Alonso even getting involved. But you touched on Aston Martin there. Vettel's had an absolutely disastrous time in Bahrain in total, and throughout preseason testing, in qualifying, got a penalty, and then in the race, he was not particularly quick either. So, but Stroll, I thought had a solid race, considering that Aston Martin didn't look that quick this weekend, but he only finished 10th, picked up 1 point. Are we worried about Aston Martin at this moment?
It's not looking amazing for them, is it? I don't think they'll have the year they had last year, which is a shame because you'd expect them to kick on. They have been affected by the way that the change in the rules has killed low-rate cars. My concern is less for the team and more for Sebastian Vettel, because this was meant to be his big new start. This was meant to be washing away all the problems of Ferrari and trying to recapture the Red Bull glory days. And what we saw was exactly what we saw last season. We saw Vettel struggling. We saw him unhappy. We saw him getting involved in needless incidents in which he was convinced he wasn't to blame, and yet he caused the accident. I would be worried if I was Lawrence Stroll running the team that this might not be the year we were hoping for. But Lance Stroll had a good drive today. He's proving that he is a driver worthy of taking notice of. And what I feel at one point isn't what he deserved in the performance he put on today.
Yeah, I'm a bit worried about Vettel, to be honest. I have to say, I think that he seems to have lost his way. He's a 4-time world champion, and you don't just lose that overnight. But I don't know what it is. He's just not what he used to be. He doesn't seem to have, whether it's a level of passion for the sport still, the desire to actually want to race. I think he did show that he still got that by switching to Aston Martin and, being that kind of driving force behind the team, this rebranding of the team. But I don't think he's going to be up where people thought he might be with scoring regular points. I think that actually now we might see a season for him that's closer to what he had last year compared to what he's had in the past.
Yeah, no, I wonder if this is the beginning of the sad decline of Sebastian Vettel. But I really hope not, because I think he's one of the nicest people on the grid. And while niceness doesn't necessarily win you races, I think it doesn't give him the ending in F1 that he deserves, because those first years were so aggressively dominant. It's like it was a completely different person. But hopefully, as the package improves through our upgrades in the year, the car will become more competitive, and we can see him hitting the points every race, as you would expect the McLarens to be doing. But I think that is very dependent on car upgrades, because that Aston Martin just isn't looking quick enough.
Maybe I'm being a bit preemptive there. Maybe he just needs some time to get used to the car. This is a new team. Stroll's been there for a while, so maybe that's the case. So let's touch on a few more things that we saw in this race weekend, and I think that a really quick point on Alpine. The car doesn't look very good. I don't think. I think they're going to really struggle this season. But Alonso did a really fine job today until he had to retire.
Yeah, it's a story of Fernando Alonso. Great driver, terrible cars, makes the car look better than it is. Eventually, the car gives up on him. It's the story of most of his time at Ferrari, story of his time at McLaren the second time. Hopefully, we pulls off a short result. But yeah, I'm not expecting big things from Alpine. I'm looking back over my season predictions and feeling a bit silly about now.
I think that Alonso's a strange one, I find, because he's been saying a lot beforehand about how he's come back into Formula One to be to challenge for the world championship. That's what he's been saying. I mean, is he delusional, or is he expecting the fact that he's going to have a good season at Alpine, and when Hamilton retires, Mercedes are going to say, Fernando, you're our man, come win your third world title and then you can retire? What's he expecting?
Well, you can only assume that's the plan based on this, because it doesn't appear to be based on the raw pace of the Alpine. It looks aerodynamically solid, don't get me wrong, but that's very different from having the power to really compete. I think Renault getting shot was probably a sign that the car was going to be rubbish, especially the sacking of Cyril. So we shouldn't be surprised. But yeah, it's not looking very competitive for him. If I was Ocon, I'd be feeling very nervous right now as well about the state of my career, because he's been cursed, really. He was unlucky to lose that Force India seat. You don't see him getting the vacant Mercedes position, Mercedes development driver or not. So you ask, where would you go? Also, I have to say, if I was Pierre Gasly and I was being hotly linked to the seat next year, I might wonder if I could stay at AlphaTauri just 1 year more based on this evidence. But we are speculating very heavily, I should say, after only the first race of 22.
We are, but it's all we've got to go off right now, and I think that it could well be indicative of what's to come. And yes, I agree about Ocon. He's somewhat stagnating at the moment, so I would be a bit worried as well. So you mentioned AlphaTauri, Tsunoda, fantastic start to the season. Really strong race. 9th place, 2 points to get himself kicked off in the season. It's always good to score points on your debut. Very mature drive, I thought, and he wasn't afraid to overtake people. He wasn't afraid to give it a go. Obviously, he looked very strong in qualifying as well, actually, and just a great race overall for him.
Yeah, there's not much else to say. His qualifying will have been disappointing, but I think he'll get better as time goes on. And I'm going to make comparisons to Japanese drivers again shortly, but this is the more flattering of the two. I think we could see him being the best Japanese driver of all time. Mantle that I believe belongs to Kamui Kobayashi at the moment. But on this evidence, you'd expect him to far outshine Kobayashi. And I'm excited to see what he can do.
I mean, he's got plenty of time as well, hasn't he? He's the first driver born in the 21st century to drive on the grid today, which is
wild,
absolutely insane. It's crazy to think how, he was 1 year old or whatever, not even 1 year. Yeah, he was about 1 year old when Kimi Räikkönen and Alonso were making their debuts. But like I said, he's got plenty of time to develop now. I think that if he really stays, I really hope that Red Bull don't just promote him based off one good season. I really hope that they give him time to flourish at AlphaTauri. Give him time to experience a decent car, which is what they've got this season. I have no doubt that in a couple of years' time, they're going to go backwards just because, I don't think they're expected to really improve that much. So I think there will be a time where that AlphaTauri is not as good as it is right now. Let him experience a dodgy car, give him that time to really shine, and then promote him when he's ready. Don't promote him too soon. I really hope that's the case.
Oh, I think Red Bull, for now, based on the evidence today, will be happy with their current driver lineup, which should give him a little bit of space to flourish and develop. Because ultimately, Red Bull want titles more than they want to vindicate their youth program. So I think if the Verstappen and Perez combination works, they'll stick with the Verstappen and Perez combination for as long as they can.
And did you want to have a word about Gasly? Because he had a pretty disappointing race today.
He did, but I feel that it all went wrong when he lost his front wing, and it's hard to come back from that. I think there was probably more lasting damage. because he qualified very strongly. He looked brilliant yesterday.
Really strong. Really strong.
And so I assume that when he lost his front wing, that was really the effective end of his race. There was probably some more serious damage to the floor. And, well, floor damage is really the end of most people's races, isn't it? Unless it's very minor. So I'm not surprised that he struggled at the back. But I think AlphaTauri will still take heart from the weekend. I think it's been a decent weekend for them overall, even if they didn't get their moment in the limelight this week.
So finally, I think we should touch on Haas.
Oh dear.
Yeah, exactly. That sums it up completely. They had an appalling weekend. They've got an appalling car. Mazepin didn't make it past turn 3, and we weren't too shocked by that. Schumacher also had a bit of an off, but he, managed to get to the end of the race. So where does Haas go from here?
Well, I believe I promised you another comparison to a historical Japanese driver. And that driver, sadly, is Yuji Ide. I honestly, if Mazepin doesn't get better in the next couple of races, will we seriously be sitting here questioning the validity of his super license? I don't believe, from what I saw this weekend, and you can bet I watched every second of this weekend, he has the understanding and the car control to be safe in Formula One. He says that his team told him to overtake people. Fair enough. That makes sense. Breaking the gentleman's code is a bit of a dick move, but it's not the end of the world. Spinning out at the end of the straight, spinning again, qualifying dead last, and then going off under no pressure whatsoever because he mishandled the throttle after turn 3. It's really basic stuff, And it concerns me that he can't do even that. I think his saving grace will probably be that he'll be too slow to actually hit anyone. But if he does, then we can definitely revisit the Yuji Ide conversation. It was so we knew Schumacher would be slow because Schumacher takes a long time to adjust new series. The Haas is a terrible car. But, Schumacher brought it home in one piece, which is acceptable for your Formula One debut, absolutely. I think I'd rather be a Gaston Mazzacani than a Yuji Ide, definitely. And yeah, I don't think there's much to say about Schumacher. He did fine. Belgium 1991, it was not, but it was tidy.
I'd like to see Schumacher in because Drive to Survive made it out like Alfa Romeo were very much contenders to sign him, and whether that's completely true or not, I'm not 100% sure. But that Alfa is obviously a much better car than the Haas, and I would have liked to. Because what we're going to see is we'll see Schumacher down in 19th place the whole time. We're not really going to get much exposure to his actual ability, and like you said, it takes him a bit of time to get used to things. So there will be no pressure on him. No one's going to expect him to. If he finishes 18th, people are going to go, "Wow, what a drive!" So I can see that. But he's not going to get a chance to overtake many people. He's not going to have the chance to really show what he can do. And I think that actually this feels like a bit of a waste of a year for him.
Well, I suppose if he takes a time to adjust to a series and he gets the year to adjust at his own pace without the weight of expectation, all the better. I would imagine that Alfa were in contention to sign him because Ferrari wanted him signed, and Alfa really being Ferrari's development squad. Would be the perfect place to put him, and he'll be regretting, I suspect, didn't go for Alfa if it was a genuine viable option, because the car is just horrendous. But at least he looked brilliant compared to his teammate, who just has no business being in Formula One. It was embarrassing for everyone involved, and I suspect Haas have no choice but to keep him because he is the money. And my greatest fear is he will get a team and then he will just sit in that team forever, being absolutely fucking dreadful. Maybe it could be a Russian team and we'll get Robert Schwartzman from Formula 2, which should at least be something. But I don't know how much better you can get when your start is that bad. The commentators have been mocking him all weekend, and that should tell you a lot.
It was really worrying to watch when he came out of that corner. Just like threw it into the wall, at speed. It was not. And when I saw it live, because obviously the shot that you have of that corner is from the end of the straight, so you see all the way down. And so we couldn't see the fact that he had done it himself. He'd just gone off into the gravel trap, and I thought, well, he could have collided with, I mean, not that I was surprised that he went off regardless of whether he hit anyone or not, but I thought that, maybe he had come together with somebody. There were a couple of cars who had some, some damage on the front wings for whatever reason, but no, he just dropped it. And you say that he's not going to be close enough to overtake anybody, but I can't see him being the kind of driver who acknowledges many blue flags either, which I think he's going to be seeing a lot of this year. So
well, you have to get a lap through to be lapped, though, wouldn't you?
That's yeah. I'm not sure if he's going to make that or not.
Like, say what you want about Bahrain turn 3, but at least Grosjean hit somebody before he crashed there.
And that's the thing as well. I mean, Grosjean was a bit of a laughingstock at times in Formula One. I think Haas would give a lot to have him back on the grid, just with a bit more money behind him, like Mazepin's got.
Yes, yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? Where do Haas go from here? I said it in their launch episode. I think they go out of the sport. They get rebranded as a Russian team. They're going to be Ural Kali Racing, and that'll be where they go. There's no future for. They look dreadful. They're like Caterham or Manor dreadful, HRT dreadful, some might say, and that is really fucking terrible.
It's such a shame, but overall, fantastic race. Really, really enjoyable season opener, and we just hope that it will continue the whole way and that we get a title fight throughout. I do think the season's too long, personally. I think that it does lead to the fact that potentially we could have it wrapped up too soon. But with Red Bull being where they are, if they can maintain this title challenge, it's going to be a really exciting season.
Yes, yeah, it is. It's going to be a brilliant season. And why do we have to wait 3 weeks for the next race?
And yes, indeed. Speaking of next race, we have got they're labeling it as the Italian Grand Prix, as it's at Imola. Next up, that's not until the weekend of the 16th, 17th, 18th of April. In between that, with the Eau Rouge podcast, we're going to have a couple of a few features here and there. Obviously, we've still got the Murray Walker tribute to come, amongst a few other things, just to keep you entertained and to keep the momentum of Formula One alive until we reach that weekend, which feels like it's such a long time away. But we will see you for it. So thank you so much for listening. Please hit like and subscribe. Please comment. We're really interested to hear your thoughts, especially on this really, really interesting race. And it will be great to hear from you. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you very soon.